Hello, Meteran. Today we're going to try cutting out a kaftan, and I wanted to show you an example of how to do this with very limited fabric. So the fabric I have here that is currently down on the cutting table is 53 inches wide, so I have it laid out selvage to selvage, and it's only about 2 yards. It's actually 31 inches with it doubled over. So it's 2 slightly less than yards. I've already pressed this, although a few of the wrinkles still want to show up visually, but it has been pressed, so it is nice and smooth. And I've pressed a nice hard edge on my one folded edge because I know that I'm going to be cutting this with at least one fold. Okay, so I just want to also walk you through kind of the decision-making process and why I would be adjusting things to try to get the best fit out of my fabric. So I'd like to start off with folding this in half again. So this is what I typically call a quarter fold. And you could do your quarter fold if you had more fabric, or I was doing this lengthwise. I could quarter fold with another folded edge at the top, which could then be over the shoulder. So I could cut over the shoulder at one folded area and center front, center back on another fold. However, in this case, I'm working with, it's a jacquard woven cotton that actually has sort of a tiger stripe woven into it. And on all of the examples I've seen of our Turkish 16th century garments, particularly kaftans, I've never seen a tiger stripe done vertically. It is kind of a modern aesthetic that we like to put stripes vertical because it does kind of give a thinning effect to the form. But I've always seen those kaftans in period having a tiger stripe horizontal. So I'm still going to go with that horizontal format. Actually, occasionally you see the tiger stripes forming another pattern like a triangle around another decorative motif. But since this was already pressed, it's actually folding really nicely. Kind of lined up that fold edge and made a double fold over here. And I just want to do this so here I actually have 4 layers of fabric. So that would correspond to left front, left back, right back. So I want to have all 4 layers. And what I've done is picked a kaftan that has a fit similar to what I want for this one. And so I picked another kaftan of mine. I've already kind of quarter folded this kaftan or folded it so that it has that back to back and the front's facing outward. Okay, and you see I've got this fold at the center front, and this is really just to check the fit. I know that my pattern pretty much corresponds with this, and that this one also was taken out of a pretty small piece of fabric, so I wanted to really go with something that had that feel. And also I know I'd like this one a little bit looser here in the torso because I'm trying to make a men's style kaftan versus a women's. This one really tucks in and is pretty fitted right around the waist as we see with the women's, but I wanted to have that slightly bulkier fit for the one I'm cutting out today. You can see that on this one I folded in where I had pieced in those. The hip bump is partly on the main body piece, and that was due to the width of this fabric that I had. But the hip bump is there, and I actually started the gore part way down. On extant examples, we actually see that seam line land in all different places. So it could land all the way as far in as here, inside of the torso line, or we see it land further out. And so in this case, it was a little further out, but I still want to see how that lands on my fabric. So I think I've got a pretty good option here to be able to cut this almost cut in one. And I think I should be able to also cut the shoulder and cut the sleeve. It might give me a little shorter sleeve than what I have here, so I might pop this on real quick and just double check the length of the sleeve to see if I'm okay with a sleeve that's a couple inches shorter. And since I'm having this gold be an under kaftan, I'm okay with having a shorter sleeve because it's also for pennsic, so I want to have only the minimal of long sleeve layers that I have to have. So our Meteran uniform kaftan would be on the exterior. I'm making that gold so that I can wear it underneath. So I'm going to pull this up to just, we'll pull it down just a hair so that I've got that space for cutting out the neckline there, and just kind of see how this is laying out. Now I want to translate this to a pattern because I helped you guys draw patterns in the previous workshop. And so this is my pattern piece, and you can see that I made some adjustments and decisions when I cut out the sample one that I'm showing you. I also made some of those adjustments and decisions, and I had marked lots of extra lines. So I've used this pattern many times, and really when we're doing historical sewing, we've drafted our own pattern to begin with. You don't have to think about the pattern as the absolute. You want to know where you can make variations and where you can make changes, because that way, even if I cut out the same garment out of a solid fabric over and over, I could make each one fit slightly differently. And that's just up to me and my own personal preference. For example, this gold that I'm doing today, I wanted to make it a little bit looser, make it fit a little larger. This one that you're seeing on top as an example is one that I cut for dancing. So I definitely wanted it to have that better form fit so that it can show the movements of the dance. So on my pattern, even though it originally was a rectangle, I've actually folded down kind of a compromise between front and back. Since I have to seam the shoulder anyway, I'm still going to cut my sloping shoulder. This matches my own personal shoulders. So I have a sloping shoulder and I need to be able to put that in. If I was cutting it really bulky, I could come straight across with a fold and do the sleeve together. But I'm probably still going to cut my sleeve separately just for the sake of having a little bit more on the sleeve, and I'm still going to be sewing this seam because these are all separate. So this isn't on a fold. I'm going to go ahead and do that angled seam. I also have a cutting line for the back and a cutting line for the front neck, and mine are about 1 inch apart, and my back neck is a little bit lower than you might choose to have on yours. And that's just because I have a neck issue in the lower neck where something pressing on it really becomes painful. So I like to have about 1 inch lower drop on my back neck of my garments. This neck actually fits really well. If it's closed totally up, it looks like a nice fitted jewel neck right around my base of my neck. So I like that fit, and I'm going to replicate those 2 lines for my cut lines. I'd still be lining this up right along the edge. And I kind of like what I'm seeing here. I could make this a smidge shorter and actually get a little bit wider sleeve out of here. And I'm thinking, as far as my overall layout when I'm looking at this, that might be what I do, is go a little bit shorter so that I could cut the sleeves separately and be able to have those in one piece. So I'm going to get to that as we move on with the cutting layout. I'm also probably going to go ahead and add the hip bump and maybe just not take it quite as wide because I'm really limited on fabric here. That's fine. So I don't have to make the skirt swing as wide. I can then go ahead and still get my front and back. Remember on the caftan, we had these front and back extension gores, and this extension on the right front, remember the right front starts at kind of hip or waist level, somewhere between belly button to hip, and then goes down to the end of the garment. And you can see on this one I was so limited that these are all pieced multiple times, so that's just fine. Piecing is totally period. And you'll see that the left side front extension actually comes, I've got this button just to hold it together nicely, but this actually comes all the way up to the neck. So you can see that seam. It's a little hard to tell if I were to open it up because, as I mentioned in our workshop, the facings cover up where that seam is happening. So the facing is wider, so it's a little hard to see it there, but if I lay it flat, you can kind of see here where that left side extension is coming all the way up to the neckline and all the way down to the hem. All right, so I want to check a couple things real quick by trying this coat back on. I want to see if I'm okay with a sleeve change, and I want to see how much shorter I'm comfortable with making this under caftan. All right, I did a quick try on and I decided that I was okay with taking up to 4 inches off of the length because that one was coming fully down to mid calf on me. So I'm okay with coming up to just below the knee. That is still a perfectly acceptable length. And I also decided that I probably don't want the sleeves to be any shorter. So what I've done is folded my sleeve pattern and set it down here at the bottom to make sure that I at least have the depth that I would like to have for that. And I'm actually going to tuck this up just a little, just a hair more. Folded this main pattern to be a little bit shorter. Okay, so I've got those pieces all laid out. What I'd like to do also is, like I said, I'm going to add where I've got the side gore or hip bump piece. I'm going to add that on, and I'm going to actually bring this up a little bit. So mine has a little bit of an extra scoop, which I did for the hip, and I had also marked this previously where I cut that as a tighter curve at the waist. But I'm actually expanding this out just a little bit. Remember I said I wanted this to go a little more manly, so I want to have a little more bulk and space in there. And I'm going to also reduce this hip bump just a little, so I'm going to overlap a little bit more. There we go, just plop a pattern weight on there. I'm also showing you a couple of my tricks for super fast cutting. So one of those is pattern weights. Pattern weights are awesome. These are little weighted bean bags. So these are nice because you can kind of plop it down, it holds things in place, and it holds it enough for tracing around or for cutting, and it doesn't take as long as it would if I was pinning my pattern pieces all over. So ever since I found pattern weights, I've run with those and really prefer using those. So I just have a tailor's chalk, and I'm going to chalk out real quick where I want these side seams to be. So I actually left a little bit of space over here, kind of just under ½ an inch, and I'm going a little, just about ½ an inch here on the sides, and that was just to give myself that little extra bulk in here. And then I will still cut in for the arm side, because I still want that to fit nicely and closely into the arm socket. I'm going to mark for my slopey shoulder. And then I'm going to mark just the back neck portion. So I basically start with my front and back, and then I'm putting a nice even curve in there. And I'm okay with freehanding it. I've just drawn enough of these that works pretty easily for me. And generally it's matching what I have here, because I freehanded that one too. So I'm going to start with marking the back, and then I know that my front I'm going to cut down almost an inch more. And so all I need is the one dot to start with that, because what I'm going to do is cut the back first and then flip that over and cut the front, but we'll get there in a minute. So I'm going to next do this hip bump, because I'm adding that right in. So I won't have to really do anything else to the sides unless I have a little extra fabric, and then I always could like piece in an extra gore here, just like you would if you were doing kind of a traditional geometric tunic. Okay, and I'm going to stop part way because what I want to do is swing this hem. So I'm going to put the edge here at the center and grab a ruler. Okay, and just like we pointed out before, I think I mentioned this when you were drawing your patterns, so I'm coming to kind of where the edge would land, but I'm coming to that hip kind of swivel pivot point, which is on this about 13.5 inches, or it's on my 13.5, but it's the opposite way on the ruler. You just need to note something so that you're able to hold on to that. And then I'm going to use that with the chalk to swivel this out. And what that's going to do is the hem naturally needs to curve upward and be wider as it comes out. So that's going to take care of that curve upward. And then remember, I stopped this line because what I wanted to do was take this and connect to where I landed. I'm actually going to come up a little bit so I get a nice smooth line. So it's going to overlap a little bit with what was drawn previous. Oh, there, I got a good spot on the chalk. Excellent. All right, so I'm just double checking. I don't really have anything else on here that I need to mark. So I'm done with that piece and done with the hip core piece. So there we are. There's the body drawn out. And next I'm going to think about my sleeve. So this is the long fitted sleeve that I've folded up to give myself kind of a straight rectangle. I'm actually okay with this coming a little wider and straighter. I tucked this up just to give me the location where I wanted it to match up on this body piece. Okay, so it's not getting cut in one with the fold. I didn't do a folded top edge, so I didn't cut the sleeves in one, but I still want this to match up. So I folded it in so that it matches where I have that arm side. So I'm going to take this, which could be a straight rectangle here, and I'm just using this to get my height estimate, and then I'm going to transfer that down. However, since this was limited fabric, I actually have a limited space here, and it could have a fold on either end like that, which isn't going to help me with a sleeve that's progressing horizontally. So if I want those tiger stripes to still land horizontally, right now they would be lined up with the horizontal tiger stripes on the body, and I've been kind of matching that pattern. But I can see that if I took those stripes and brought them up here, and then I'm angling them a little bit when I sew them, that's not going to give me like a perfect stripe going outward. So I could angle downward just a little bit when I'm cutting, if I have the space to do that. But I'm also going to join these sleeves in a different way. So since I'm cutting out just rectangles, it's okay if one rectangle is, instead of one rectangle being the front and one being the back, which I might do if I had a fold here at the top, because then that fold would be the top of the arm and I would only have a seam under the arm. Since I'm going to have two seams because I didn't have a fold in the right direction here, I'm going to actually shift it so that that seam is not landing directly on the top of the arm. So I'm going to kind of shift this sleeve a little bit. I'm still going to cut out those rectangles, but when I sew it together, I'm just going to shift the seams and put them where I'd like them to be before I'm setting them in to the kaftan as a whole. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead with cutting, and since it's going to end up a little bit like that, I said it was okay to rotate it down a little bit, and I'm going to bring this just in line there. I already have a chalked line on that side, and I was actually okay with this coming a little more rectangular, so I'm okay with that distance. So I'm just going to mark on the selvage. That's kind of the length I have right now. If I took off the selvage, I currently have sort of the depth I'd like to have. So I'm just going to keep that in mind, and I'm quickly double check the length of the sleeve. And I could go a little longer with the sleeve, which I am perfectly okay with. So I'm going to take that sleeve piece out just a couple more inches. And mark that from where this hem was, downward. And there I have my sleeve piece. So I'm done with that piece. All right, I think what I'd like to do next, because remember I still had a fold over here, I'd like to cut these pieces, and then I'm going to look at what scraps we have left and see how to piece together the front left and front right extension. I'd still like to get an underarm gusset cut out and a neckband. Okay. I also like to use, if I'm cutting quickly, sometimes use a rotary cutter. A lot of garment sewists don't think about these because they come from quilting. I'm just concerned that the rotary cutter is going to have a little tough of a job because this is a heavy fabric. But I like the rotary cutter in that it doesn't push and offset the fabric underneath, which your scissors, because they're lifting, they're always kind of offsetting the fabric a little bit as you cut. I'm just going to come back with these because I had a couple spots that didn't quite go through. And when you get to a corner, you just have to kind of like nudge up to the corner and then get to the other side and nudge back to the corner. I'm actually going to smooth this hip bump curve just a hair. So we didn't get through one layer there. Definitely use the rotary cutter if I'm dealing with velvet or silk, but I wouldn't always use it on this heavy fabric. I just wanted to show you kind of another tool, another fast way to cut out. I'm going to switch back to the scissors real quick. So again, just trying to show you kind of fastest and most efficient ways we can do this. Another benefit to the rotary cutter, like I've been working with cutting hardware cloth with wire cutters this week, so my arms and hands are really screaming at me. So the rotary is a little friendlier than scissors. So scissors can also kind of get those same muscles and tendons and things that might be involved in tendinitis. So the rotary cutter can be really helpful. These are actually pretty helpful too. So these are the spring-loaded scissors. This makes it so that your hand and your muscles aren't doing the work of pulling it open every time. They're just another kind of accessibility aids for sewing for those of us who have some issues. All right, so here we are. I have some body pieces for my kaftan, and what I want to do is make a couple more cuts here. And in this case, because I also want to cut this totally open, a little fold there, I'm going to come to my front edge. And just to be careful, if you haven't done this kind of cutting before, it's probably safer for you to pull your middle layer out. So that middle layer is going to be my back piece. Back piece does not need any changes. And this fabric also is sided. So I've already decided that I wanted all my tiger stripe motif kind of going horizontal. But if you also look, I will have to decide, because it's a jacquard woven fabric, it's just in the weave that the pattern shifts. So I'll have to decide whether I'd rather have this side which is like a little shinier on the background and less shiny on the stripes, or if I want the other side that's a little shinier on the stripes and dull on the background. So just have to make that decision as I'm sewing it together. I'm just going to make sure I've got a nice edge here, and I'm going to cut open the front of the caftan. So what I'm doing here is not just randomly cutting, I'm kind of pushing the scissors. You see me holding it taut. I'm pushing the bottom blade of the scissors outward so that it really sits tightly into that pocket. And that's going to help me to get a nice straight cut down here. And it's okay if it's off by a few threads. I mean, I'm going to actually serge all these pieces before I put it together, because again, we're doing super fast sewing to get these ready for pennsic. And I am now on 6 days and counting before pennsic. I'm going to go ahead and cut that curve up for the front neck. There we go. So it kind of matches at the side, but it's about an inch lower here in the front. So there's my front pieces. That's ready to go. Already has the hip gores. And I'm just going to stack that here with the back. And the next thing I'm going to do is look at our front extensions. So I have these nice long pieces. And what I'm going to do is slide the body back. And one of these pieces was on the fold. So now it's a nice bigger piece. But two of these were on the shorter side. So what I want to do is I'm going to check. So I've got a double width here if I was to come up to the neckline. That's still getting a little skimpy up there at the top. So I still might want to piece that, but it's actually probably not too bad. That's about an inch wide, and I could bring that seam allowance really minimal and use that piece as is. And I think I would be just fine with that. So I'm first going to cut that piece so that I have that extra width that I'm taking advantage of. And I'm going to still take advantage of all the width that I have, but I first need a straight line on one side. So I'm going to take a quick pause and just press this open. Okay, so I pressed this open and I still can see a little bit of my line there, but I first want to get a straight line. And what I did was just look at my grid and come up. This is 2, 4, 5, 2, 4, 5. It's a little hard to match once you're far away with something laying on top of it. So I just kind of took my scissors as a pointer and put them there. And I'm going to line this up so that I'm getting all the way up into that very tip for my straight edge. This is where the rotary cutter is really superior, because I can bump it right up against the ruler. I just got it partway down because I want to bring this over and match up. And I think this cutter is getting a little dull. Alright, so I have that straight edge on one side, and that's going to end up matching up to the caftan. And since this is going to be the left-hand side, then this is actually probably going to help make my decision for me, because I just cut that without thinking about which way it was going. So if this is going to be my left-hand side, then I think I'm going to have the shiny background and the dollar stripes versus the other way around. All right, so I'm going to throw the rotary cutter on the floor because I'm sure that's good for it. And then see how much of an angle I can get for my front piece. So if I'm sort of maximizing, I've got this lined up. I'm actually okay with the selvage being here because this is going to get totally taken in with the lining as well. So I'm going to go ahead and take this angle. I'm kind of maximizing where it lands on the fabric. And that's about where my edge is. So I'm cutting off like the barest amount over here. You kind of see how little that is. And then I'm going to line it up and bring it down to the bottom of the fabric. But you can see how I balanced it with the biggest part at the bottom before I cut up into the smaller amount. So part of optimizing our fabric use is also figuring out how to cut our shapes in order to have as little waste as possible. And I already feel pretty good about this fabric purchase. This was something I got in a remnant bin at a secondhand fabric place. So I feel like it's already a little bit of recycling waste and repurposing, but I still want to make the most of it. It's still valuable natural resources, so I want to make sure that we're getting the most out of it. All right, now I mentioned that this was going to kind of make the decision for me on the side that was facing, because this one that goes all the way to the neck is always the left-hand side. So see, this is my left-hand side, so this would fold right in like that, kind of ready to be sewn in place on the left-hand front. Remember, we laid the back on here on top, so that's the back piece. Now I need to cut the right-hand side one, and remember that that one is going to come in line with either the waist point or partway down, but I think I have plenty that I can go right here to the waist. So I can either take the rest of that scrap or grab one of my other offcuts, and they're basically the same. So I think I'm just fine with using this one, which I had already cut a nice straight edge on. So I'm going to pretend this is my straight edge. Again, I'm lining up the bottom, so I've got the widest bit first, and I'm coming up to just above where the hip bump is. So I'm going to kind of start this. This is a nice width too. So I'm going to start it right about there. Just going to put a little snip so I remember where that is horizontally. And then again, I'm taking from that point, so I can cut it all the way across. I'm going to take it from that point and I just kind of maximize what I can get out of the fabric. So I'm starting there, and right here I've got a little curve that comes in, so that's actually limiting where I swing. See, if I swung wider, I'd have a dip, and I don't really want that dip. So I'm going to go just inside of that, and that's going to kind of dictate where that angle comes out. Definitely time for a blade replacement. I haven't used the rotary in a while. You can see how it's just leaving some spots, which means there's probably just a dull spot on the blade, and whatever it hits on the rotation, which is where it sometimes helps to go back and forth a few times with the blade. Kind of jogging it like that, because that'll catch a sharp spot. Alrighty, so there is my piece that would actually fold this way because this was the left side front, this is the right side front, but in order to put it the right sides out, it will fold under, and those are all now stacked in the way they will sew together. So I now have, I had the hip bumps, I have the front and back, or front left and right extensions, and I have sleeve pieces. I've got this extra piece here, which has 2 individuals and 1 fold. That's a nice square. I also typically, again, kind of the fabric conservation for cutting is I will cut out of the smallest piece that I can get what I need out of as I get down to these smaller bits, because keeping this intact gives me more options for this piece of fabric. Where if I cut it up and I cut right out of the middle of it, I would be losing that potential for what that piece of fabric could be. Okay, so I've already got the front and left extensions. I think the only other pieces I needed was a neckband and an underarm gusset. And then I also talked about potentially adding onto that skirt with some kind of standard gores. So I could do that here. I have a couple pieces that are nice and long that I could do that kind of gore. They wouldn't be very big. So it's kind of deciding, you know, is it worth it if this gore kind of comes that way? I'm not sure. I'm not sure that that's really worth it for 4 inches of extra width. So I might hold off on that and just keep these scraps because I may use them for something else moving forward. But I'm going to go back to, again, some of these smaller bits. So for my underarm gusset, I want 2 3-inch by 3-inch squares. These are the pieces I cut out from the neck, which might barely be 3 right in the middle, so I'm going to set those aside and come back here to this piece that was a cutaway from making those other lines straight. So I can see that even from here I have 3 inches, and I have 3 inches of depth all the way over until I reach here. So I'm going to straighten this up. Well, I don't mind that it's a little bit off grain. They are underarm gussets, which are intended to be for flex. What I'm going to do is actually straighten it up this way. So I'm cutting off where I had that selvage, because I know that I'm going to fell these, and this selvage weaving is a little bit stiff and it isn't necessarily what I would want to be felling into an underarm. Okay, and then I know that I need six going this direction. So I'm going just to here. I'm going to pull this up so it matches on my underneath grid. And with this quilting ruler, I can actually easily line up where I have 3 inches wide. I can see where I'm 6 inches in. So I'm going to start right there, cut outward, and then bring this to the end. And split that in half. So I have 2 3x3 squares that are ready to be my underarm gussets. So I actually have, plenty of scraps where I could also do the fabric buttons and make the fabric buttons to go on this caftan, which would be a really nice touch, especially continuing that tiger stripe woven in motif. So I think that would be a lot of fun. All right, we have the hip bumps. I have the left and right front extensions. I have the underarm gussets. The only remaining thing was the neckline piece. And what I'm going to do for this is measure the neckline. This is a curved ruler, but it actually the zero starts up here. So I'm going to go in there and go at about 1/4 inch is what I'm usually putting that seam allowance at. So I'm going to measure. I have 5 inches on this portion, which was the back neck. So I have 10 inches for that. And then I'm measuring what I have on the front pieces. And that's about 5 3/4. I'm going to call it 6. So I need 10 inches, and 6 times 2, another 12. So I need 22 inches for my neckline, at least 22 inches. And we're going to cut a little extra because also when we bring that band around, I want to have seam allowance for folding in at the edges in order to create that neckband. So I'm going to come back to our scrap pile. And I've got some smaller pieces, but clearly that's not going to give me 22 inches. Because I've got my grid on here, I'm just taking a quick look to see where I could get 22. It looks like this will work just fine. And I actually now want this to be a little bit on the bias. So I'm going to intentionally cut that so that it's out of the bias. I'm going to make sure I've got my 22. So I'm going to come to 23 or 24. 24 is a safer bet, so we're going to go with that. And what I'm doing here to kind of maximize that is I've got my 24. I'm looking at where I've got these little divots that are cut out, so I need to swing that way just enough. But I want to swing it in order to get it more, or as much bias as I can. Like I'd be okay with coming to a 45-degree angle, but obviously I can't do that this way. So I'm also going to just check it in the other direction and see where would our 24 land. Well, the problem is the other direction doesn't have that extended piece. Again, this could be pieced, so I could also just kind of choose a different way to put it together. But I know 24 is also giving me a little bit of bonus. I don't mind that that's landing on the selvage. And I'm going to just kind of keep adjusting it until I see that what I have will work. And I'm doing this just at 2 inches, which is not going to give me a huge standing collar. Again, I'm only going to do about 1/4 inch on that seam allowance. So that's going to give me about 1.5 inches to work with. Go back and forth a little bit with this rotary cutter since it's got some dull spots. There, much better. All right, so that's the one side cut, and then I'm going to come to the other. And you can see where if I've got my 2 inches, I've just got my 2 inches on here. I'm going to scooch this down just a hair because I'm hitting my bump in between my tables. So just jogging that back and forth a little bit really helped with getting those extra pieces cut. And you can then bring this down and straighten up that end. All right, so I have a nice neckband piece ready to go. And I still had my extra scraps. This actually looks to me like enough to make a round and possibly to make a band if I piece my band together. So I could possibly even get a tarpouche made out of this little bit of scraps, which would be it's a really nice color. It would go with lots of things. So that might be the option I go with my pile of scraps, is cutting out a tarpouche. Okay. One more thing I want to show you guys is these sleeve pieces. So right now, because this was folded, these are actually 2 long pieces, but I know that I'm going to use them at that shorter length and that I still want the stripes running this horizontal direction instead of turning and going vertical. So I'm going to cut where that is joined together. Again, I'm just kind of pushing the bottom blade of the scissors outward as I go so that it kind of gets a nice taut cut up in the corner. And this is where I was talking about if I was to sew this as is, I mean, I could put a seam on the top, which might not actually matter that much because it's a busy fabric. I might be able to make that seam just sort of disappear, especially if it was felled. So I might actually go that route. That's going to keep a seam under the arm, which is where I would like to have it land. The other alternative would have been to cut 2 pieces and then have 1 piece that went over the top like that, and that would have made then 3 more pieces, or to piece the sleeve together like this, where I had sort of seams that were landing somewhere else in the distance of the arm. But remember, on our Turkish kaftan sleeves, we're going to always see that little front cutout. So I'm going to take the front and the back, and I think I will just end up hiding that top seam just because this is a nice busy fabric, and then having that piece. But I want to show you real quick how I would cut out that center scoop, okay? And I did talk about in the workshop kind of leaving, it's helpful if you leave a little bit below, and we're leaving a little bit from the top. So the scoop is not the entire front arm. We're leaving a little bit there before we have the scoop, but I went just about an inch on the bottom, although that is including the seam allowance, so it's just going to be a little above, which I'm probably going to pull that up just a hair more. So I'm going to go inside of my selvage, my seam allowance, by an inch, and then on this side, bring it in an inch. And then when I go to cut that C curve, I want to bring that in about 2 inches. So I'm coming down 2 inches, marking my point, and then what I'm going to do is create a nice curve. And like I said, if you're not comfortable with freehanding a curve, you can always grab a rounded object and use that to draw your curve, or you could get something like a French curve and maybe create a curve that matches that. But this isn't going to be as balanced of a curve, so we do want something that's still sort of a nice direct C shape. So I'm just drawing that in. And then I'll go ahead and cut this out. All right, so that is the end of the cutting portion video. And next I'm going to go and serge my parts, or at least the parts that aren't going into the facings. I'm going to serge my pieces and then show you how to cut out facings next.